conjecture. The only other thing that's extant, and I haven't heard anything of it, was the reporting that the report was Ryan Grimm had another story about the lawyer who first blew the whistle on Judge Kozinski out in California, who at the time everybody thought this lawyer was a lunatic, and ultimately was vindicated because Judge Kozinski turns out to have been a grade A level sexual assaulter creep, and we had this. There was a hint of this yesterday, or I guess today, Thursday. The story of Amy Chua, I guess it is, and her husband, who were coaching a particular woman who was looking for a clerkship, and there was some like overtones, allusions to like he likes a certain look, he wants a woman who is outgoing, and this woman had said she had heard stuff about Kozinski and stayed away. She had heard from Kavanaugh that there was some stuff, but not so much to dissuade her, and so I think there's probably a concern that there's somebody out there who says, I know Brett Kavanaugh knew about Kozinski because I blankety blank blank. Now, for someone to come forward in that circumstance, they are obviously going to be in the legal profession, right? They are probably in the federal judiciary. They may have to go in front of a colleague of Kavanaugh's professionally. Yeah. I mean, that is a very risky proposition. And those people may be sitting back going like, making a calculation like, I don't want to do this if I'm not going to, if he's going to end up on the court, because then I'll have done this to a Supreme Court justice, as opposed to a guy who's not a Supreme Court justice and, who the senators rejected. So it's unclear if we're going to hear from those two federal judiciary employees that this lawyer supposedly represents. So that is extant. We may hear things over the weekend. We may see some compelling appearances on television. Part of the reason why they're negotiating is probably to get her not to appear on television before she testifies. And, her team will make that assessment if it's worth it or not. Because I'm not convinced that her going on television, her going on 60 Minutes, her going on the Sunday talk shows, whatever it is, won't have the same sort of damaging effect. Like, go ahead, vote for him. I just gave my testimony to the American public. Brett Kavanaugh hasn't a chance to respond, and that's because you guys insisted on having this on Monday. I mean, the next couple of days are going to be fascinating in that regard. And we should just say before we go that one of the things that Donald Trump likes about Brett Kavanaugh is his perspective on presidential powers. Yep. And whether or not he could be subpoenaed. And at the beginning of the week, it may seem like a year ago, Paul Manafort's plea deal cooperation agreement was, basically made public, more or less. And this guy is wrapped up. There's no wiggle room. They can fire Kavanaugh. I mean, they can fire Mueller. But Manafort, there's all the stuff is lined up, ducks in a row to get him, to have him liable in at least one or two states, it seems to me, by a state AG. And, Tish James in New York State, I'm sure the first thing she would love to do is to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't get away with firing Mueller by, bringing up charges on Manafort. That story is like sort of weirdly hovering in the background. Like I feel like any other week we would be talking nothing but that.
Oh, we would. I mean, it was huge actually, and the right has this whole alternate narrative that they're on, that they're trying to push so they can give Trump some kind of justification for ending the investigation after the midterms, which Lindsey Graham and Grassley have both sort of indicated, winked and nodded anyway, that it's fine with them if Trump does it after the midterms. And just before we got on the phone, it was reported that Michael Cohen has spent over a dozen hours with Robert Mueller now. And I don't think Mueller's wasting his time with this guy. And there's no agreement, no cooperation, no plea, nothing. I think it's just purely this is voluntary, and they're talking to him. I think Trump is in a panic, and that certainly is the reporting that he's in a panic. He released this classified information on the Carter Page stuff and this whole crazy conspiracy story this week. He released classified information, which he hasn't even read, purely on the basis of what the people he trusts, who he names as Lou Dobbs and Sean Hannity in the interview he gave to The Hill this week. I mean, this is becoming, and in fact, having Kavanaugh on the court, and perhaps this is why, really, when you get right down to it, they are so adamant that it be him and not one of the dozens of replacements they could easily put in. Is because Kavanaugh is a guy who has pledged his loyalty, and he's a good party man, and he's a good, conservative movement operative and a character assassination, and he has probably let everybody in the place know that he will back whatever the president's play is if any of these cases make it to the Supreme Court, and he will do it under the auspices of, presidential power, which he has, he can. There is a judicial basis or a legal, philosophical basis for doing this, and he's probably a guy that Trump now has sort of assumed is his best chance.
Let me just I want to before we wrap up, I want to just put a finer point on that. All right, so that people can just to get a sense of this. People forget this. Neil Gorsuch, there was a moment where he said, and maybe he just said it to a senator, but maybe he said it somewhat publicly.
Blumenthal. He said Blumenthal.
Yeah, it was Blumenthal, where he said, I think it's inappropriate to go after judges because of their ancestry, something to that effect, right? And which showed a certain amount of, at least some measure of willing to not completely toe the line. Brett Kavanaugh got up in front of everyone in the first statement he ever made as a nominee to the court and said, Donald Trump, like one that would have almost sounded like just bizarre to even say about any president. He spoke to more people about this nomination than has ever been in the history of presidents, or something to that effect. Something so ostentatious that it was so clearly a suck up to Donald Trump. It was almost like Donald Trump wrote it and gave it to him. I mean, that's the way that the diction sounded. And this is the same,
like the doctor report that his doctor put out.
Honestly,
it was like that.
Exactly. And so, just to get a sense of like where this guy's integrity is. This is the same guy who made that face, Kasowitz, when he was talking about his best friend's law firm. His best friend who had been there for 9 years. That is like grade A. This is the type of stuff like you warn people about, right? Like, I wouldn't get too friendly with this dude, or certainly,
right.
I mean, that type of stuff is. So just to, if it's not enough to like talk about what he did to Monica Lewinsky, forcing her to say, count how many times that, anybody, never mind the president, but anybody ejaculated, in their mouth, that type. I mean, this guy went through. People should go back and read the questions that he asked Monica Lewinsky. He was also considered the designated leaker. That reports in the national memo. Don't know why that didn't get as much attention. This guy is a despicable character, and it's quite possible. It's, for a lot of people, it would be sort of, I feel like, a little bit hyperbole that they went in there and said loyalty pledge to the president. This guy, I wouldn't put it past him for a moment. And so it could very well be that Donald Trump has made it clear it's this guy I want, and if you don't get me this guy, I'm going to go, I'm going to go rogue in terms of the midterms. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, because we've got to know that Donald Trump cares about his future not in prison. Or his kid's future not in prison, far more than any type of, conservative legal worldview.
Oh, God. He doesn't even know what a legal worldview is that no, this is all about self-preservation for him. And and he has sort of this grandiose idea that he's shaping the country for the next 50 years, which is true, but not because anybody's doing it because of him. This is purely a conservative movement accomplishment, is getting these people on the courts and packing the lower courts as well. I mean, it's not just the Supreme Court. I mean, McConnell is just, he is ramming them through one after another. And that is Trump's legacy, but he can't really take credit for it since he doesn't even know.
And it doesn't mean anything to him. It doesn't mean anything.
No, it's not nothing to him. But the idea that he has obtained loyalty from this guy, I really believe you're right, and I don't think Kavanaugh would hesitate. This guy is a Republican operative. He's not, as Brian Schatz said on Pod Save America, he said, he's not like Justice Gorsuch. He's not like Justice Roberts. He's not even a justice. He's a Republican activist, a Republican operative posing as a judge. And that is exactly what he is. And it's the perfect person for Trump, right? Yep. I mean, this is the guy that will do whatever it takes, that could easily be the one that they could bring in and say, hey, Brett, babe, just tell this guy, give him, get down on your knee, kiss his ring, tell him you're there for him, and, that is what he needs to know. And I have no doubt that one way or the other, whether it was that overt or a little bit subtler, it can't be too subtle or Trump wouldn't understand it, but, something to indicate that this guy was there for him and that he would hold the line on anything that came before them, because Donald Trump is all about self-preservation. Tim O'Brien, the journalist who also was sued by Donald Trump years ago, and won his case. He says there's only two modes. Trump doesn't have a strategy. He has two modes. One is self-aggrandizement, and the other is self-preservation. That's it. That's right. All he is. And I think that that's true. And in this case, what he's looking at right now is self-preservation in big time, especially after that Manafort plea. Yep. And that locomotive, that Mueller locomotive, is bearing down hard, and he's probably desperate to make sure that he's got as many backstops around him as he can to try and preserve, his actual future, much less his presidency.